On an autumn evening in Minnesota, Sarah Thompson stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. Outside the window, maple leaves beginning to change color swayed in the wind. At 42, Sarah felt a sense of peace in this ordinary routine, but also a hint of emptiness. "Tom, we're having chicken pot pie tonight," Sarah called toward the living room. There was no response. Her husband Tom was, as usual, focused on the television. Their relationship had grown cold, with conversations becoming scarce, but Sarah tried to convince herself this was the natural state of a long-married couple. As they sat around the dinner table, Sarah thought about her son Michael. He had just graduated from college and started a job at a company in Chicago. "I wonder how Michael is doing," Sarah murmured. Tom only responded with a short After dinner, as Sarah was washing dishes as usual, she suddenly heard the front door open. "Tom?" she called out, but there was no answer. When she went to the living room, Tom was there. But he wasn't alone. Next to Tom stood a girl about 10 years old. The girl's figure was dimly visible in the darkened living room. Sarah was confused and speechless. "Sarah, we need to talk." Tom's voice was low, filled with tension. "Tom, who is this?" Sarah's voice trembled. Tom let out a deep sigh and said, "Emily." "You raise her," before heading towards the front door. "Tom." "Wait." "What do you mean?" Sarah desperately tried to stop her husband, but Tom opened the door and left without looking back. The sound of the door closing broke the silence. It was the moment Sarah and Emily were left alone. Sarah couldn't contain her shock and leaned against the wall. "Is this a dream?" "Yes, it must be a dream," she whispered to herself. However, the presence of the girl before her eyes forced her to face reality. Emily's small voice brought Sarah back to her senses. "I'm sorry." "Emily, right?" Sarah tried to smile gently, but her facial muscles wouldn't cooperate. And at that moment, Sarah gasped. As she stared intently at Emily's face, familiar features caught her eye. The color of those eyes, the shape of that nose, and the curve of that faint smile. As if looking in a mirror, there was a resemblance to her deceased sister, Lisa. Sarah's body began to tremble. The word "no way" escaped faintly from her lips. Emily looked up at Sarah with an anxious expression. "Emily, is your mother's name?" "Lisa." Sarah's voice was shaking. Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, but Mommy's not here anymore." At those words, something crumbled inside Sarah. It had been 5 years since Lisa's death. All this time, she hadn't known Lisa had a child. And now, that child was standing right in front of her. Sarah knelt down, lowering herself to Emily's eye level. "Emily. I'm your aunt. Lisa was my sister." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. The two just stared at each other without words. Only the ticking of the clock marked this moment of surprise and confusion. Sarah's mind was swirling with questions and emotions that kept surfacing one after another. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her emotions. Emily, standing before her, couldn't hide her exhaustion and anxiety. "Come on, Emily. Are you hungry? Would you like something to eat?" Sarah asked gently. Emily nodded timidly, and only the sound of their footsteps echoed in the quiet house as they headed to the kitchen. Sarah took cheese and ham out of the refrigerator and began making a simple sandwich. Meanwhile, Emily sat quietly at the kitchen table, fidgeting with the edge of her clothes with her small hands. "Here you go," Sarah said, offering the sandwich. Emily said, "Thank you," in a small voice and began to eat slowly. Sarah sat next to her, watching over Emily while trying to organize the questions that kept popping up in her head. After Emily finished eating, Sarah made up the guest room bed and said, "You can sleep here tonight. If you need anything, just call me, okay?" Emily crawled into bed and quickly fell asleep, exhausted. Sarah returned to her own bedroom and picked up her smartphone with trembling hands. She sent multiple messages to Tom, demanding an explanation, but they weren't even marked as read. She tried to contact him on Facebook and Instagram too, but there was no response. After a sleepless night, Sarah called a local law firm first thing in the morning. Johnson and Associates Law Office, came the response. Sarah explained the events of the previous night. "Mrs. Thompson, from what you've told me, your husband's actions are indeed problematic," Attorney Catherine Johnson replied in a calm voice. "Child abandonment." With the quick response typical of a medium-sized town, Sarah was able to meet with Catherine at her office that afternoon. Tom's actions likely have legal implications. "Let's start the legal process regarding Emily's custody and how to proceed," Catherine explained. As Sarah left the office, she let out a deep sigh in her car. Then, with shaking hands, she called her son Michael. "Mom? What's wrong?" Michael's voice was tinged with worry. "Michael." Sarah tried to explain the events since the previous night as calmly as possible. But midway through, her voice choked up and tears fell. "Mom, it's okay. I'll come home this weekend. We'll figure this out together." Michael's voice gave Sarah a little comfort. The next day, Sarah started moving early in the morning. First, she had to take care of Emily's immediate needs. She bought clothes and daily necessities at the local mall, and in the afternoon, she contacted the local Board of Education to discuss the procedures for transferring Emily to a new school. "Emily, how about starting at a new school tomorrow?" Sarah suggested. Emily looked a bit anxious but nodded slightly. At dinner time, the two sat quietly around the table. "Emily, do you like school?" Sarah asked. Emily's expression brightened a little. "I like art class," she answered, showing a small smile for the first time. On Friday night, Michael came home. Hearing his call of "Mom," Sarah rushed to him and hugged him tightly. After grasping the situation, Michael said, "I'll help as much as I can. Let's create a new family together," and placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder. That night, the three gathered in the living room to discuss their future. Emily seemed a bit nervous, but as Michael spoke to her with humor, she gradually relaxed. The weekend passed, and it was time for Michael to return to work. At the front door, Michael said, "I'll come back soon," and Emily replied in a small voice, "I'll be waiting." Hearing those words, Sarah and Michael exchanged glances and smiled. After seeing him off, Sarah took a deep breath. There were still many challenges ahead, but she felt she could move forward one step at a time. It was a morning that gave her that feeling. Around the time Emily was starting to get used to school, Sarah quietly decided to make her next move. On Catherine's recommendation, Sarah contacted private investigator Jack Morrison. Jack's office was on the second floor of an old building. "Mrs. Thompson, it will take time to understand your husband's behavior patterns," Jack explained. "But I promise to uncover the truth." A few weeks later, Jack contacted Sarah. "I've received some important information. I'd like to meet with you in person to discuss it." That afternoon, Sarah visited Jack's office with a tense expression. "Mrs. Thompson, this is going to be difficult to hear," Jack began cautiously. "It's about your husband Tom, and your sister Lisa." As Sarah listened to Jack's story, the color drained from her face. Tom had been having an affair with Lisa for years. And even after Lisa's death, Tom had secretly continued to raise Emily. But why now? Sarah's voice was shaking. "That's another problem," Jack continued. "I got information from Tom's colleague. Tom is preparing to move abroad with a young woman." Sarah left the office in a daze. She sat in her car for a long time, her mind in chaos and her chest feeling crushed with pain. The next day, Sarah visited Catherine's office with a firm resolve. "I want to start divorce proceedings," Sarah said quietly but with a determined tone. Catherine looked at Sarah sympathetically and began to explain, "I understand. First, gaining custody of Emily is our top priority. At the same time, we'll investigate the possibility of Tom hiding assets. We'll seek a fair division of property." As the legal proceedings progressed, Sarah decided to take a step towards independence. She found a part-time job at the local library. "I'm a bit nervous about working in a new environment, but I want to move forward on my own," Sarah told the interviewer. A few weeks after starting work, Sarah gradually began to regain her confidence. Not only was she able to support the household, but she also started building new relationships. Meanwhile, her relationship with Emily was also deepening. One evening when Sarah returned from work, Emily was drawing something at the kitchen table. "Emily, what are you drawing?" Sarah asked. Emily showed her the picture a bit shyly. It depicted Sarah and Emily walking hand in hand. "Is this us?" Sarah's voice trembled slightly. Emily nodded and said in a small voice, "I feel safe when I'm with you, Aunt Sarah." Sarah hugged Emily impulsively. "Emily, thank you," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. That night, while making dinner together, Sarah began to slowly share memories of Emily's mother, Lisa. "Your mother was a very kind person," she said. Emily listened with great interest. Each time Emily said, "Tell me more," Sarah unraveled more precious memories. Before bed, As Sarah was reading a picture book to Emily in her room, Emily suddenly asked, "Aunt Sarah, can I call you Mom?" Sarah was at a loss for words and just hugged Emily tightly. At that moment, she felt their bond deepen even further. A new chapter in their lives had begun. There were still many challenges ahead, but Sarah and Emily would move forward one step at a time, supporting each other. Sarah began to feel a new bond forming through her days with Emily. One night, when Emily woke up from a nightmare, Sarah gently embraced her and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here with you." That night, they talked for a long time, sharing Emily's anxieties and worries. On the weekend, Sarah took Emily to a local art class. "Emily, your drawings are really wonderful," Sarah said, and Emily's face lit up. "I want to get better," Emily replied, and at that moment, Sarah was determined to nurture her talent. After dinner, they looked through photo albums together, talking a lot about Lisa. "Your mother used to laugh like this," Sarah said nostalgically, and tears glistened in Emily's eyes. Every time Emily said, "Tell me more," Sarah continued to gently share her memories. The neighbors also warmly watched over their new family structure. The elderly neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, sometimes brought over homemade apple pie. "You two are such a lovely family," she smiled. Michael also called frequently and visited during his vacations. "Mom, how's life with Emily?" Michael asked, and Sarah happily replied, "It's challenging at times, but every day is fulfilling." However, their peaceful days were shaken by a sudden event. One Saturday afternoon, as Sarah and Emily were planting flowers in the garden, Tom suddenly appeared. "Emily, we're leaving." Tom's voice was cold and intimidating. Sarah immediately shielded Emily behind her and confronted Tom. "What are you doing here?" Tom replied irritably, "Emily is my daughter. She's coming with me for our new life." Sarah calmly explained, "Tom is planning to move abroad with a new woman and is trying to use Emily for a favorable property division." Emily clung to Sarah fearfully. "I don't want to go," she pleaded in a small voice. "I know all about your plans, Tom." "Legal measures are already in place," Sarah retorted with a resolute attitude. At that moment, Mrs. Johnson rushed into the garden. "Is everything all right?" she asked worriedly. Soon, other neighbors also gathered. In the tense atmosphere, the sound of Michael's car screeching to a halt was heard. "Mom!" Michael shouted as he ran over. "Tom, just give up," Sarah said, suppressing her trembling voice. "We have evidence of your misconduct. We're prepared to submit it to the court." Tom looked around and realized he was at a disadvantage. Muttering, "Damn it," he turned on his heel and quickly left. Sarah let out a deep sigh of relief. Hugging Emily tightly, she gently said, "It's okay now. We'll always be together." Surrounded by neighbors and Michael, Sarah and Emily held each other tightly. Having overcome this crisis, their bond had grown even stronger. A few weeks after the confrontation with Tom, Sarah was taking deep breaths in the courthouse hallway. Catherine placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder and encouraged her, "It's going to be fine. Everything will work out." The verdict was announced, and the divorce was finalized. Sarah was also granted sole custody of Emily. The judge stated, "Considering the defendant Tom's inappropriate actions, I judge it best to grant custody to the plaintiff Sarah." As Sarah left the courtroom, she hugged Emily, who was waiting. "It's all okay now. We'll always be together." That night, Michael called Sarah. "Mom, I've decided to move back home." Sarah was surprised but couldn't hide her joy. "But what about your job?" "It's okay. I was able to transfer to the local branch. I want to be with you and Emily." The following week, Sarah started her job as a full-time employee at the library. "Mrs. Thompson, your experience is valuable to us," the library director said. Through her daily work, Sarah gradually regained her confidence. Meanwhile, Emily's talent was also blossoming. Her painting titled, "My New Family," won first place in the children's division at a local art exhibition. Watching Emily receive her award certificate at the ceremony, Sarah's heart swelled with pride. That night, Sarah sat Emily on her lap and decided to talk about Lisa and Tom's relationship. "Emily, your mother Lisa was my sister. But she passed away early due to illness," Sarah gently explained. After Lisa's death, Tom couldn't overcome his grief and guilt. He sought a connection with Lisa through you. Emily listened quietly. "But that was wrong, wasn't it?" she said in a small voice. "Yes, it was. But as a result, we were able to meet," Sarah smiled. A year later, on a beautiful autumn Sunday with colorful foliage, Sarah, Emily, and Michael were enjoying a picnic in the park. "Hey, Mom," Emily called out. Sarah was surprised for a moment but was soon enveloped in a warm feeling. It was the first time Emily had called Sarah Mom. "What is it, Emily?" Sarah asked gently. "How's this drawing?" Emily showed her sketchbook. It depicted the smiling faces of the three of them. "It's wonderful," Sarah said, deeply moved. The drawing was later displayed at a local event called the Family Bonds Exhibition, touching the hearts of many people. Sarah had begun local activities to support single mothers, using her own experiences. "I hope our experiences can be of help to someone," Sarah said. With Michael nodding beside her and Emily happily looking around, Sarah felt happiness. Their new life, having overcome difficulties, was set to shine even brighter.